Good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is, welcome to week 6, your virtual class. How you doing? Welcome to week 6, your virtual class. I'll be your professor today, Tom Carnegie. So as you know, we've been studying content marketing and building networks as part of an overall suite of things to create a strategy for using social media to generate earned impressions and engagement. Today we're going to focus on one really important technique to do that called storytelling. So, telling stories. What's it all about and why is it important? Why would you want to learn this? Well, we've been telling stories for a long, long time, humans that is, and we seem to be wired for it somehow. You need to learn this because you want to develop persuasion skills. Also, to complete this course successfully, you will have to tell a story using up to 9 social media posts in your final assignment. So, without further ado, let's move on. Oh, wait a minute, there's another reason we want to learn storytelling is because marketing has changed. So if you think the days before the internet, you could just sell. You could put your product front and center, and you might still come across this in advertising, copywriting world, make the product the hero. Storytelling is really about flipping that to making the consumer the hero and your product the helper, helping the consumer reach their goals. You may already know that, it may be obvious, but it's worth reminding. So, on to how to tell a story. Tell a story. There are lots of different ways to tell stories. You can tell stories with songs, with jokes, with books, with movies, with comics. Really, almost any way you can communicate, you can tell stories. You can tell stories in 60,000 words. You can tell stories in 60 seconds. Or in just 6 words. Stories can be words, stories can be pictures, stories can be sound. We're going to cover some of the elements of a good story and then dive into one way to tell a marketing story using social media. The first thing to think about is audience. You know this from advertising. Of course, we need to think about Charlie and Charlene. Who are you talking to? What are their demographics? What do they care about? You would know this from your other courses. Now you need to apply it and speak in a language that they can relate to. One thing you may not have seen that comes from the user experience field is something called an empathy map. And if you really want to dive in to understanding your particular Charlie and your particular Charlene, you can do an exercise like this where you kind of imagine what are the things that they're seeing. Top of mind, how do they think and feel? What do they hear? What do they say and do? What are their pains and gains? This can give you insight in helping you shape a story in which how you can demonstrate how your product, service or idea, helps Charlie reach his goal. That's the first element of telling a story. Know your reader. Every story needs pathos, logos, and ethos. You've seen this before too. I know I've showed it to you in consumer behavior, and I'm sure you've picked it up in other copywriting courses in advertising. Messages need to have logic and proof that's true. The message source in particular needs credibility or ethos, and there needs to be some sense of trust. But the most important thing in terms of actually motivating people to do things is pathos, emotions, values. These are what underline most motivation of humans, it is believed. Emotion rules, so that brings us to element 2. Emotion rules, but you need logic and trust to really communicate. That brings us to element number 3, the premise of your story. Premise comes from 2 Latin words meaning to put before. The premise is the foundation of your story. That the thing that follows throughout, and it's not what happens to the characters, but it's what happens as a result of the actions of the story. For instance, the premise of the 3 Little Pigs is foolishness leads to death, wisdom leads to happiness. It's not that the 3 little pigs build houses and get scared by the wolves. It has an underlying moral, you might even think of it. Now, much of our marketing messaging may not have a very deep moral, but it still can have a premise. What's the premise of your story? It can be quite hard to come up with a premise, and you may actually have to start writing the story. In fact, you should anticipate writing the story multiple times. And I'll show you an early draft of a story I'm working on a little bit later. But you might think if you're doing a fashion thing, it might be along the lines of choosing the right clothes will make you feel more confident and become more successful. Or if you're into saving the bees, it might be if you like to eat, you need bees. And saving it be as possible if you do this. If it's climate change, it might be just that there's a global emergency, and by doing these things you can help fix it. The premise being that every little bit counts. Finally, for Otis, and Otis says, your dog gives you unconditional love. You want to give him the best of everything, don't you? These are all my attempts at coming up with premises. You'll have to think about your own, and it will evolve over time. This brings us to the most important thing, element number 4. The most important thing is to craft a story that Charlie or Charlene can empathize with. This is why you need to know them so well, so that you can leave those little details that make them really relate to it and give them a sense that they have empathy for your lead character. So it doesn't mean that you have to have a character that looks and talks like Charlene, although that's one approach. It means that you have to have a character that Charlene or Charlie can empathize with and relate to. In my case, I'm going to use dogs. What do you know about that? Story structure. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. A story can be told all at once, or it can be told over installments, like social media posts. Story arcs, sometimes called narrative arcs, are the storyline or the pattern of rising and falling tension that take place during a story. Here's a visual of the Freytag pyramid, and you can see sort of at the beginning, our main character is just going through life, and then something happens, the inciting incident. Tension begins to rise. It might be negative tension, it might be positive tension, it might be an obstacle they need to overcome of some sort. The tension rises to a climax. All sorts of great action. And then that climax becomes resolved, and there's falling action as the story comes to a close. Often, the main character will go through some sort of transformation. And that last part of the story is about reflection and showing how things have changed. A variation on this theme, or I guess an application on top of this, is something called the hero's journey. So, it's one example of a type of story where a likable and reluctant hero with an idea who encounters a roadblock and ultimately emerges transformed, usually with the help of a mentor or somebody or something. I think of Luke and Yoda from the Star Wars franchise. When we're doing this in a marketing concept, we want to make the customer a hero of the story. Hero's journey, insert video here. Hero's journey, insert video here. Nancy Girard talks about the secret structure of good talks in her TED Talk. It's a lot of talks in there. Anyway, she analyzed a number of world-changing speeches given by people like Martin Luther King and the Apple guy, what's his name? Jobs, yeah, right. And anyway, she comes up with kind of 4 things. One is you need to establish a big gap. That's the tension. Next, you need to provide an alternative of what is and what could be. So if we keep going the way we're going, what's going to happen versus what could be if we did something. So you're setting up a conflict. What is and what could be. You amplify the gap. You want the gap to be as big as possible. And then at a turning point is the call to action. What it will be like. Anyway, check out the talk. It's really pretty good. Especially if you're doing a cause marketing. All right, this brings us to one of my favorite formulas, which is the Pixar formula. Basically, the idea is that for any Pixar movie, they kind of test the storyline against this formula. Where once upon a time, there was a person, a boy, a girl, a dog, a plant, an ant, a whatever, a family. And every day, they did this and they did that. Until one day, something happens. Usually a bad guy appears. Or something like that. A huge challenge arises. And then, because of that, they transform in some way. Maybe in this case, they have superpowers that they have to use. And because of that, something happens. And because of that, something happens. Until finally, we have some resolution. We'll dig into this a little bit more in a minute. Be right back. Hi, I'm back with the 3-part story structure worksheet. Now, it's in the Google Doc, which you have a link for. I'm just going to drag it over here into my screen. You should be able to see it now. Yeah, so it's a little worksheet where what I've done is I've taken the Pixar formula. Well, first of all, I start with the premise that every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this worksheet kind of breaks that down to help you maybe develop your story. So in the beginning, if we take the Pixar formula, we have the first couple steps. Once upon a time, there was Otis. Every day, he went for a walk. And then one day, he noticed something. And then to help you sort of flesh out that section, you can look at the 3 parts in this table where, you need to establish the time, once upon a time, the context, Otis is walking, and the main character, Otis. We could provide a little bit more detail about Otis and things he liked and that sort of thing, but at its bare bones, that's all it is. Then we have to set up a challenge, and that is every day. And one day something happened, and that's the beginning of the challenge. So in our case, in my example, Otis notices something. He notices a dog that doesn't seem happy, and he wonders about that. So tips for a good beginning. I've also included a couple of those down at the bottom of this table. I think you can see those. Parachute in, don't preamble. In other words, don't spend a lot of time setting up the context. Just get going with the story. Make a good first impression. Start strong, end strong. Any good story. And make an emotional connection if you can. The next part of our workshop is, of course, the middle of the story. So beginning, middle, end, right? In the Pixar, I think it's sort of because of that. So our character, Otis, has noticed something, a dog that's not happy. Now, because of that, he thinks. He thinks. And because he's thinking, he wonders what he can do about it. And he realizes that he has a big challenge because he doesn't have opposable thumbs. So you bring the conflict to a peak and you resolve it. Where we haven't resolved it yet, we have a conflict. We have an Otis with no opposable thumbs. How can he do anything about that unhappy dog? He can't go. He's on a leash. He can't go up to him and talk to him. He needs to do something. So, because of that, he goes home and he sniffs around the house. And because of that, he discovers a miracle device that allows him to interface with the internet. Ooh, yes, more to come on that. And we're sort of morphing from the middle to the end here, because as we get into the end, it's the until finally, in the Pixar thing, you finish the story. So in my story, Otis finds the mind reader headband that allows him to interface with the internet, and he creates an Instagram account to create awareness that dogs have emotional lives, and if you own a dog, you should take care of it. Yeah. So you can see their practice activities creeping up, but we'll talk about those in a minute. And we're back with an activity. Yes! You get to outline your very own story. Let's just see if we can find the slide, shall we? There we go. So, the activity, your assignment for this week, should you choose to accept it, is to use the Pixar formula to outline a story based on the Falbana picture, which I'm going to show you shortly. Put the outline on your blog. So quite literally, I'm looking for you to take that Pixar formula and write out once upon a time the day there was, once upon a time there was, and fill in the blank with your aspect of the story. Every day, what happened? One day, and because of that, until finally. Now you can have more than just 2 because of that. So this isn't a strict formula. Anyway, that's really it. So you're going to create a blog post. You're going to put the Falbana picture in it, and you're going to tell me the story, literally just using the fill in the blanks of the Pixar formula. You do need to write a little headline for it, and you also need to do a social media post and submit the links to 2 of those via Brightspace. More details in Brightspace. There's the Falbana picture. It's called Falbana, because it's a banana and it's got elements of fall in it. Yeah, isn't that clever? Well, have fun. I really look forward to hearing and reading and seeing what you guys come up with in terms of a story. Feel free to collaborate with each other. Why not? You each have to submit your own thing, but you can talk about what you're doing. And then I'll tell you the real story behind this picture next week when we see you. Bye for now. Bye for now. So, in addition to the Pixar story on the Falbana picture, it's also 3 memes week. So, go find yourself 3 internet memes that relate to your theme of choice, the one that you're using for your blog. Post examples of them and write a very short analysis of each and why you think they're viral worthy. Yeah. So 2 assignments due for next week, the Pixar story and the 3 memes. For further study, and I think that self-directed learning is obviously important because you're going to continue to learn things all through your life. But storytelling specifically is something that I think is a craft that some of you may really want to develop. And there's this kind of cool, kind of retro online storytelling course. It's an open online course. It has a bunch of activities and stuff, and you can join it and you can relate. It has a Twitter handle, which is kind of fun. And if you want to practice your skills, it's a great way to do it. I also created you a storytelling Pinterest board. Of course I did. Yes. So go have a look at that and browse around a little bit. And then I've got some storytelling resources for you in the reference links. So if you remember reference links, you can find it on Brightspace. I've got a whole Google Doc filled with gloriously curated links for you. Yes, indeed. So have a look at that. A reminder, next week, your storytelling post 3 memes. And then finally, stay curious. Next week, we'll be talking about viralistic things and having more fun. Hope you have a great week. Look forward to seeing your stories. Bye for now.